If there is a single consistent aspect to Donald Trump's strategic vision, it's this: U.S. foreign policy should always be governed by the simple principle of America first, with this country's vital interests placed above those of all others. "We will always put America's interests first," he declared in his victory speech in the early hours of November 9. "From this day forward, it's going to be only America first, he insisted in his inaugural address on January 20. Since then, however, everything he's done in the international arena has, intentionally or not, placed America's interests behind those of its arch-rivals, China and Russia. So to be accurate, his guiding policy formula should really be relabeled America Third. Given 19 months of bravado public rhetoric, there was no way to imagine a Trumpian presidency that would favor America's leading competitors. Throughout the campaign, he castigated China for its predatory trade practices, insisting that it had exploited America's weak enforcement policies to eviscerate our economy and kill millions of jobs. "The money that we drained out of the United States has rebuilt China," he told reporters from the New York Times in no uncertain terms last March. While he expressed admiration for the strong leadership of Russian President Vladimir Putin, he decried that country's buildup of advanced nuclear weapons. "They have gone wild with their nuclear program," he stated during the second presidential debate. Not good. Judging by such comments, you might imagine that Donald Trump would have entered the Oval Office with a strategic blueprint for curbing the geopolitical sway of America's two principal potential great power rivals. Presumably, this would have entailed a radical transformation of the strategy devised by the Obama administration for this purpose, a two-pronged effort that involved the reinforcement of NATO forces in Eastern Europe and the rebalancing of U.S. military assets to the Asia-Pacific region. Obama's strategy also envisioned the use of economic pacts, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, to buttress those military measures. But Trump had made known his disdain for NATO and the TPP, so it was reasonable to assume that he would arrive in Washington with an alternative plan to ensure America's primacy on the global strategic chessboard. As President Trump has made clear in recent weeks, however, his primary strategic priorities do not include the advancement of America's status in the race for global strategic preeminence. Instead, as indicated by the outline of his America First foreign policy posted on the White House website, his top objectives are the extermination of what he calls radical Islamic terrorism and the enhancement of America's overseas trade balance. Just how vital these objectives may be in the larger scheme of things has been the subject of considerable debate, but few have noted that Trump has completely abandoned any notion that the United States is engaged in a global struggle for power and wealth with two potentially fierce competitors, each possessing its own plan for achieving greatness. And it's not just that Trump seems to have abandoned the larger geopolitical playing field to America's principal rivals. He appears to be doing everything in his power to facilitate their advance at the expense of the United States. In just the first few weeks of his presidency, he has already taken numerous steps that have put the wind in both China's and Russia's sails, while leaving the untied states adrift. Trump's China First foreign policy and his approach to China. Donald Trump has been almost exclusively focused on the issue of trade, claiming that his primary goal is to combat the unfair practices that have allowed the Chinese to get rich at America's expense. It was hardly surprising, then, that his nominee as U.S. Trade Representative, Robert Lighthizer, is an outspoken critic of that country's trade behavior. It seems clear that the U.S. manufacturing crisis is related to our trade with China, he told Congress in 2010. But while trade may be an important part of the U.S.-China relationship, Trump's single-minded fixation on the issue leaves aside far more crucial political, economic, diplomatic and military aspects of the Sino-American competition for world power and influence. By largely ignoring them, in just weeks in the Oval Office, President Trump has already enabled China to gain ground on many fronts. This was evident in January at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. While no senior representative of the soon-to-be-installed Trump administration even put in an appearance, China was represented by no less than President Xi Jinping himself, a first appearance for a Chinese head of state. In a major address, denouncing No names mentioned. Those who seek to turn away from globalization, Xi portrayed China as the world's new exemplar of free trade and internationalism. Say no to protectionism, he insisted. It is like locking yourself in a dark room. Wind and rain are kept out, but so are light and air. For many of the 1,250 CEOs, celebrities and government officials in the audience, his appearance and remarks represented an almost mind-boggling shift in the global balance of political influence, as Washington ceded the pivotal position it had long occupied on the world stage. 6 days later, on his first weekday in office, President Trump appeared to confirm the Chinese leader's derisory comments by announcing his intent to withdraw from negotiations for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, thereby abandoning U.S. leadership in efforts to vastly augment trade in the Asia-Pacific region. From Trump's perspective, the 12-nation trade deal, which included Australia, Malaysia, Japan and Vietnam, while carefully excluding China, would harm American workers and manufacturers by facilitating exports to this country by the other participants, a view shared by some on the left. At the same time, however, many in Washington saw it as bolstering American efforts to limit Beijing's influence by increasing trade among prospective TPP member states at China's expense. Now China has an unparalleled opportunity to reorganize and potentially reorient trade in the Asian region in its direction. There is no doubt that this action will be seen as a huge win for China, said Michael Froman, the trade representative who negotiated the TPP under President Obama. For the Trump administration, after all this talk about being tough on China, for their first action to basically hand the keys to China and say we're withdrawing from our leadership position in this region is geostrategically damaging. Among other things, China is expected to encourage Asian countries to join it in an alternative trade arrangement, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, including the 10 members of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, as well as China, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand and India, but not the United States. The RCEP aims to lower barriers to trade without the environmental and labor rights provisions incorporated into the TPP. On January 28, in a phone conversation that ended abruptly, President Trump further undermined America's geopolitical stature in Asia by berating Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull of Australia, a country that has been a staunch American ally since World War II and which houses several U.S. military bases. According to press accounts, Trump responded angrily to Turnbull's plea to honor a promise made by President Obama to take in some 1,250 refugees, many from Iraq being held by Australia in squalid conditions in offshore detention centers. "I don't want these people," Trump is said to have shouted before hanging up on the Australian leader. The insulting tenor of the call has provoked widespread revulsion in Australia, with many people there reportedly questioning the value of the country's close association with the United States. Above all, his rebuff of Turnbull is thought to be beneficial to China. Trump is needlessly damaging the deep trust that binds one of America's closest alliances, said Professor Rory Metcalfe, head of the National Security College at the Australian National University in Canberra. China and those wishing to weaken the strongest alliance in the Pacific will see opportunity in this moment. Trump, China and the global climate fight. Perhaps the greatest gift Trump has bestowed on China, however, has been his drive to scuttle the Obama administration's clean energy initiatives and its commitment to the Paris Climate Agreement. By turning the clock back on climate action and putting in office a crew of climate change deniers, Trump has opened the door for China to emerge both as the world's leader in green technology, while creating millions of new jobs for Chinese workers, and in international efforts to slow global warming. Recall that in pursuing progress on clean energy, President Obama was driven not only by a concern for the future depredations of climate change, but also by a desire to ensure American preeminence in what he perceived as a global race to master the green technologies of the future, a race in which China was feared to be a likely winner. In 2013, he pointed out that, until recently, other countries had dominated the clean energy market and the jobs that came with it, but, when we begun to change that. As long as countries like China keep going all in on clean energy, so must we. To assure American primacy in the clean energy race, Obama channeled vast sums of money into